I'm Twak, and this is my AGDQ 2020 submission video for Hob, any percent no FPS abuse. So, the any percent no FPS abuse is a category specifically because there are some clips in this game that can be done at low FPSs, like below 20 frames per second, and to sort of just rule out those and make a category that can be applicable on more hardware. That's why this category exists, just to get that out of the way. The game Hob is about you play as this little creature named Hob who gets awoken by a golem named Jeeves, and you are sent on a quest to restore the floating islands of this world to its former glory and destroy the evil alien corruption, but we're going to do as little of that as possible. The first trick coming up on here is a collision boost. Certain objects will push you up slightly when you first walk on them, and by jumping during those first frames, we are able to get slightly higher than normal. Lets us climb onto areas we can't normally do so. Just like there as well. Now this is one of the first difficult tricks in the game. Okay, so that was intro clip. Pretty much that cutscene is normally the second half of a longer cutscene that you have to go sort of to the east for. But by clipping into that room, by walking over the edge, and then just before we go off, turning around so that we stumble a bit, we're able to go through the wall and go into the loading zone for the second part of the cutscene, which saves a pretty, I think, a minute and a half, 2 minutes. There is one problem with that, which is that the loading zone for the initial cutscene still exists, but that doesn't really come into play except for a few tricks later on in some bit of routing. Just as long as we don't try to touch that initial loading zone, we'll be fine. So, let's see. So our goals for the game is, of course, to beat the game, and to do that we have to get to the tower that's floating above the land, and to do that we have to collect 4 golem colossus cores from large colossi around the area. And then we also, in order to do that, have to clear out the 7 pods or cores of alien corruption. This jump can take a few tries, but luckily there is not much of a time loss for missing it, even this many times. Here I'm going to try and get the scoop, just a tiny little fun animation cancel right there. Kind of looks like he scoops up part of the sword with his hand. There's a lot of small time savers and animation cancels like that in the game, which can be pretty fun to run. Means there's a lot of room for improvement and optimization. Here Jeeves is going to get us the sword pieces, and there's going to be one more of those small animation cancels coming up. My goal is to press X to activate the forge, but then mash A afterwards to try and jump like that, which skips putting the first piece of the sword in. And while I'm getting the sword, I can go ahead and talk about animation cancels a bit more. So when you do an attack, at least certain attacks, during the startup of the attack, if you roll, it will cancel the attack into the roll, and you'll get a bit of extra forward momentum just for a moment from doing so. This is most effective with a walking sword slash, or a walking unsheathed sword slash, where your sword is sheathed and you start walking instead of sprinting, or a thrust, or a charge punch, which we don't have yet. But by doing that towards a ledge and then jumping at the last second, we're able to do a long jump, which gets us much further distance than normal. That right there is a trick called the Bush Twacker, half coordinated, named after me. We're able to long jump onto that bush, which lets us bounce over to that wall. Saves a good, like, 15 seconds of other routing. And that's one example of where long jumps come into play. Luckily, that's one of the trickier long jumps in the run, so it's good to get it out of the way. We're going to do another one up here to just save some time from climbing down this ladder. If you try to just do a regular jump, it works. But if you're just a little too off, then you will die. Luckily, the nice thing about long jumping there is if you miss the long jump and you don't do it quite at the right time, you'll just climb onto the ladder and you can climb back up to save time. So here we're getting punch, which is going to let us break some walls and crumbly floors. There are 3 golem arm upgrades. There is punch and then warp and grapple, and we need to get all 3 during the run. And the interesting thing about these upgrades is they all use that same machine, and regardless of which specific machines you visit, like in what order, you'll always get the upgrades in the order of punch, warp, grapple. So theoretically, if we could go to Grapple Cave first instead, we would still be getting punch from there. Right there, I just did something called a sword stance, slashing stance walk. By attacking and then holding X, we're able to move in a state that has a bit of a different hitbox, and that lets us get a collision boost there to go into that window. Now, I went to the main menu there because if you go too fast throughout the start of the game, then the fast travel point over here to the left will not spawn correctly. However, if you go to the main menu and continue, then it will spawn when you go over it. And this is actually one of the few fast travel points we go to, so it's really important we get it here. If you don't get it, then you can still just manually walk from our next location to here and try to spawn it then. But it does take a bit more time to walk back. Right there, just above me there was where that cutscene loading zone was. I had to drop down instead of walking across to avoid it. Or else, if you approach it from that side, regardless of if you skip the checkpoint, you will have to restart the game. And there I did that same collision boost, but I did a long jump over to that wall. And if you noticed, I went slightly out of my way to get a checkpoint before that, because if you fall down into the space between that ledge and the one I jumped from, then you have to restart. You can't actually get out of there. You have to respawn. It's another small thing. If you roll towards one of these batteries and then turn away from it as you're picking it up, you can do this little slide. I don't know if it actually saves any time, but it's a fun little animation. So, as I'm going into Warp Cave, I should go ahead and mention one of the last main pillars of strats we have, which is fall damage cancels. By putting yourself where you can do a grounded slash in midair and then a punch near the ground, we're able to cancel any fall damage we get, like that. Which normally you would die if you try to fall from that height or jump from that height. But that way we're able to just come down here. It's important to do that there because there's a checkpoint just northwest of here. And if we get that checkpoint, then we have to take some extra steps to leave the cave. But since we didn't, we can just respawn back at the entrance. There's a few different ways to initiate a fall damage cancel. That was just a walking slash fall damage cancel, where you walking slash doing that unsheath attack over the edge, and then do an attack or another slash which counts as a grounded one, and then the punch. So now that we have warp, we can go ahead and fast travel back to Forge, and we can go ahead and go to Dome. there is a quick collision boost I'm gonna do that afterwards I need to long jump over or under a kill plane. So if you go too high or too far to the right there, then you'll die while you're in midair. Luckily, you know, after you've done it enough times, you can kind of visualize where it is. Here's outside of Dome, which is the first time where you can really see a lot of long jumps and movement at once. So this is personally one of the more fun parts of the run, or where it starts to get fun. You have to take damage from that bramble to do that long jump. And there, I was aiming for the ladder, which if you can get on the ladder, there's another route you can take that saves a few seconds. But this isn't much slower at all. And it's much safer anyways, because if you miss the ladder and go too far to the right, you'll die and have to respawn. When I'm finished pulling this lever, I can punch to cancel the animation where Hobbs sits around and just kind of stares off like that. I have to be careful though. And if I do that successfully here, then I can do something called a Kong jump, which is when you attack and jump at the same time, which gives your jump weird properties. Like that. And the main weird property is that if you do that Kong jump while a platform is lowering or raising, you will gain extra height from it, regardless of whether the platform's lowering or raising. So it's particularly useful in that regard, because otherwise we have to push that big bridge in the middle across in order to reach that switch. Here I'm going to take damage again, and I died from the bramble there. But that's perfectly fine, because all we have to do now is walk over to the center. So it's not a bad time loss at all. Whoops. That was my mistake. After pressing this button, I'm going to try and clip through the right side of this fence. This is something you should be able to do at most FPSs. There's a big gap here that sometimes while it's lowering you can go through. It doesn't save a whole lot of time, of course. So now we're going into Dome, and at this point is where more donations would be read, such as while this elevator's lowering, could get 1 or 2 in. All I'm doing here is pushing 2 large batteries under this platform. So pretty much there's not a whole lot of interesting stuff going on here. The most I can say is I start with the right platform and then go to the left one, or the right battery, then go to the left one. Because after I push in this left battery, I can try and save a little bit of time by jumping off of this center platform here. There we go. That gets me to this button sooner than normal, which lets me activate it quicker, which lets this cutscene start quicker. This is another part where donations would be read. All I do at this point is just kind of pirouette. For Dome Part 2, first of all, by walking off of that gray part, you don't take any fall damage. But if you walk off of any other part of the platform, then you will. We can do a long jump here to land onto this platform. That is called Big Pipe Skip. There are like 100 ways you can do it. Almost everybody has their own way of doing the Big Pipe Skip. That's the way me and Savade, the current world record holder, do it. That bracket I jumped to on the corner of that pipe can be pretty tricky as well. It's kind of a small collision box that you can actually grab onto, but usually lining up with the rounded wall there, and then just normally jumping works. This is another part where donations could be read, since for the most part, until we get to the third part of Dome, after the next chain of warp pads, there won't be any more tech involved. It's just pressing these switches and buttons. And then same for this one. A little bit of history about the run of this game. So, this game was previously run in SGDQ 2018, and after that run, me and another runner by the name of Savade both started finding a lot of glitches in this game and a lot of new routes. A lot of the stuff I found was just applications of long jumping and fall damage cancels that we didn't previously have. But Savade found a lot of like cutscene skips and various tech involving respawning. And then we both kind of worked together on some of the momentum-based things. I'm going to go ahead and try to do the cool thing here. Okay. I did it too early, but that jump is supposed to be a first cycle skip. If you get it, it's really fun, but for the sake of marathon safety, I am just going to wait a second here. And then get on this platform. Probably have another one donation or so here. One or two. So coming up is the end of Dome, or Factory, is I think how it's actually called in the game's files. And there is one last sort of fall damage cancel we need to do. Normally the fall damage cancel would be done by warping off the platform and then doing the normal attack and then punch. But that one can be kind of tricky because when you warp off of these platforms, you'll gain a lot of speed in whatever direction you're going. So instead, I do something called the Leap of Faith, where I just walk off of that platform at a specific spot towards that ladder. And then I'm able to grab on the ladder before I hit the ground, which resets the fall damage counter, or tracker. And then I should be able to do a long jump there. That one can just be kind of finicky. You have to do it from this brass part here. There we go. And then we're going to get the first keystone and leave Dome. And from this point, we're starting to get into the actual plot of the game. So far, this has all been set up for us to go see Sprite Mom. There are these like woodland sprite fairy creatures that float around the forest, and the mother, I think it's literally called Sprite Mother in the game's files, is the one that gives us the quest to clear out all the corruption. And there is technically a way to clear out some of the corruption before you visit Sprite Mom. However, if you do so, then the game will soft lock, because when Sprite Mom gives you the quest to clear out all the corruption and gives you the quest to clear out the individual corruption, those are two separate quests. The ones for each individual corruption clear when you clean them, but if you have already removed the corruption, then you won't be able to clear that quest. And then the quest for clearing out all the corruption, which is what gives you the final Colossus core you need, only actually clears when the other 7 quests are cleared. And this is something we knew since like the game first came out, is that it would soft lock if you didn't do Sprite Mom corruption first. However, we didn't know why until recently. Really quick, I'm going to be doing a boss fight here. These each have 7 health. They can take damage from the bugs that spit as well, but I just do this to be safe. So, recently, we found that by using console commands, we can see the quests of the game. And we figured out how that works because we've been routing out an all-quest run. This is Spinning Room, one of the most fun to get right. I'm just going to try to do it and explain what happens afterwards. Alright, that was the most important part. So the first part there, I do a warp and buffer a jump by holding A immediately after I warp, which lets me use the momentum I gain from the warp, or from the spinning platform onto the warp, and then do sort of a long jump from that. Whoops. Okay, I'll do this the normal way. This jump, you should be able to just jump across. And you can also do a long jump or a warp as well. Either way should get you to that ladder. It's just kind of tricky because even doing a normal jump will carry over the momentum, or the rotational force, rotational speed. So it'll kind of send you at an odd direction, which is sort of what the warp there was able to do. The second part, I did a Kong jump as that platform was raising, which let me carry over, get some extra height, use that to get closer there. So as I was saying, we have to do this first in order to get the quests in line so that we can complete them. Theoretically, if you started the game with the quest to clear out all the corruption and the quest for each individual corruption, then you would be able to do it in any order. But because you only get those now and it resets your progress for ones you've already cleared, we can't sequence break that hard. But after this, we can do the corruption in any order we choose, which technically does matter for one of them. Because you're supposed to backtrack to reach the cemetery corruption, which I'll be getting to as the 3rd corruption I clear out up there. But now we can just kind of go in a clockwise motion around the world. Not much to say at the moment. This would be another good time for donations during the marathon. Just some basic grounded movement, which I forgot to mention at the start. By just canceling the attack into a roll, we're able to move along the ground quicker. Now, when you're on the ground, you either have to do that like walking slash or a thrust as the first attack you do, or you have to do roll, attack, roll, which works if your sword's already out. So it's quicker to do that when you don't have thrust in, if you already have your sword out, instead of sheathing it and then unsheathing it every time. But here, I just do a walking slash roll to go over that platform without jumping. And it works fine. So here's fence jump. There's an electric fence directly south of here. And there's a few ways to jump over that, but they're still pretty risky. Whereas we are also able to long jump from this step onto here. Now, if we don't jump to the left and hug the left wall, there is a cutscene where a fairy is about to die, and Rogue, which is an NPC that looks like the player character, will appear for the first time. Technically second time, but the first time directly interacting with Hob. So that lets us skip that cutscene for only maybe a few seconds lost compared to the electric fence jump directly. After I clear out this corruption, I'm going to start moving right as fast as possible. This is because I want to do another clip that works on most FPSs through this wall. But if I did it and I went through the loading zone behind this door at the same time as that map ping, then the game would freeze and I'd have to reset. There we go. So I either want to do it before that map ping or afterwards. You can usually tell when it's coming based on the music. So one of the biggest differences from the old route to the current is the route that you might have seen at SGDQ 2018 got the thrust upgrade, which lets you do significantly faster grounded movement compared to this. And it also lets you do some long jumps easier. There's actually, sort of directly north of us where we are now, there's a pillar. And with thrust, you could long jump onto that pillar and then jump off of that to get a slightly quicker start to cemetery here. But without thrust, we can't. And the main thing is that thrust costs 50 gems to buy. Might be 60, actually. 50 or 60. And so previously a significant part of the early game was routed around getting those gems and then getting thrust before you did dome. Which did take some amount of time and going out of our way to get certain gem caches. But without getting thrust, we're able to save a lot of time. Here we can just kind of keep moving before Jeeves finishes talking, so we can start going to where we need to be up here while he's doing that. And with a long jump to the left, we are able to skip over having to do a long portion of cemetery first. Because we can climb up here and go down here to get our next sprite for the next corruption. For the most part, the sprites are all like directly next to the corruption. There is one sort of outlier in the corruption nearest the intro area. But you do have to get that sprite before you clear out all the corruption in a given area. Those goat enemies that you might have seen earlier, they chase after Hob pretty quickly and they'll explode when they reach him. So you gotta be really careful with them. Luckily, those are some of the easier goats to dodge, but two of the later corruption areas will have those enemies. So there, I think you can just walk off onto that tree and be fine, but that lets us get into Warp Cave early from the wrong exit, or the wrong entrance. Or Grapple Cave, my bad. Which, this is Grapple Cave. By long jumping down here, we're able to do that same thing where we skip getting a checkpoint and we can immediately leave the cave by respawning. So grapple is sort of like your hook shot ability, as the name might imply. It lets you pull certain objects, but more importantly, grapple to grapple points, which are those blue circles you saw in the background. And we don't use it quite yet, but it will get fairly busted. A lot of the most insane tricks involve using grapple. For now, we have to leave this area. There is a large dungeon we missed, or not a large dungeon, but there's a dungeon we missed south of here that, if you do it, would let you just climb up that ladder normally. So, since we didn't, we have to do that series of collision boosts to get up there. So, by jumping up this Colossus, I can get that checkpoint. And I'm going to be trying to do something called Jeeves and Rogue cutscene skip. This is a cutscene where Jeeves and Rogue meet for the first time, and Rogue gives you a keystone to open the next area. And by doing a charge punch and respawning, we're able to respawn while moving into a loading zone for the cutscene. I want to be about here, so that I respawn pretty much between the middle of that bush. Now when I respawn from this checkpoint, I'm going to quickly be moved over to where Jeeves and Rogue are at some point or another. There we go. Then Rogue is going to appear shortly. By slashing, I'm able to keep doing stuff while she does that. Then, once she places the keystone, I can actually pick it up now. Which lets me start moving much quicker than had I just walked up to the cutscene normally. Of course, the camera doesn't immediately start following Hob, so I have to use the map to navigate myself a bit. Looks like I'm in the clear, though. As long as I'm going in this direction, once Jeeves unloads there, the camera jumps to me. And this is another bit of just regular movement. There could be time for like one donation until I get to the next area. Alright, so here's water, or reservoir, and the interesting thing about reservoir, so normally in the game, if you're playing this casually, you open this and then you have to fix the pipe so that it floods water to the other areas. Of course, we don't want to fix the pipes at all because that's slow. But there's also a large amount of quests to go through to even start that, as well as to get the corruption normally. But we don't have to do most of that. Instead, we can use grapple storage. Grapple storage is started by grappling onto a grapple point with your grapple button, left bumper, and either during the startup or at the very end when you're like ending the grapple onto the point, you punch. And this stores the grapple state while letting you do things that aren't grappling, so like moving around, as well as it lets you store the point at which you were grappling so you can grapple back to it. This has some restrictions. For example, if you get too far out of range of the grapple point, then the game will crash. But that's only on the overworld. Because if you go into a dungeon, so another map, while you have grapple storage, then you actually, the grapple storage tries to move you, or tries to lock onto that point that it was on the overworld, which ends up being really far away from the dungeon. And so it kind of moves you in a fixed location. And while you're grappled, you can move through walls, as you might have seen me do earlier, if they're in your way. Now, I have about 4 or 5 minutes to do this before the game crashes from just being in the dungeon. but I should be able to get to the corruption and clear it in those 4 or 5 minutes. And if not, it's easy enough to get the grapple storage again if it crashes. It's not too much of an issue. Maybe it loses 30 seconds. There we go. Go down here, do this. Grapple when I see that platform, then I want to go here, jump vertically downward like that a bit. Okay. I should still have time, but to be safe, I'm going to go back up the elevator, because returning to the map where the grapple point was, while you're as long as you return in an area that's still in range of the grapple point, then it resets that timer. So I can just do this and go back down for safety. But like, there's another entrance to this dungeon that opens up on the far north side of water, but if I were to go up that elevator instead, that would be out of the draw distance of the grapple point I'm stored to, and so it would crash the game upon coming out of the elevator. I almost accidentally got a glitch where I fell through the water and walked on the bottom of it, the bottom of that like tank. I'll try this one more time. Usually I have more than enough time to go through water. Okay, so now I can go up here, clear this sprite, go down here. If I don't do that second grapple while I'm falling, then I will take fall damage and most likely die, which means I have to reset the timer again and go back all the way here just to clear out the corruption itself. But as soon as I get the chance, I'm mashing menu to respawn. And then I'm gonna leave on the elevator as soon as possible. And fingers crossed, okay, no crashing, perfect. But previously, we would leave the grapple at that, but this grapple storage does let us do another thing much quicker. So now I'm going down to the pipes corruption, which is just south of here, and this was found fairly recently in terms of what's in the game, but you can hold on to this grapple storage while you're heading this way, and once you're done with the corruption, it is quicker to grapple back towards water and take the fast travel point there than it is to manually walk to the wetlands where the next corruption is. I'm gonna wait for that deer to explode, or that goat, just because it can get pretty dangerous otherwise. So here, I just have to jump this way, cancel it while I'm there, which also saves some time because it gets rid of a more tricky long jump to set up this, to get to here. But once I clear that out, I'm able to grapple away. And something kind of fun, when we move out of draw distance of the corruption, it actually stops the music. So we're going to take a return to intro area with the forge, and I'm gonna grab the checkpoint here. Ooh. Sometimes you automatically walk back into the teleporter, and I don't know why. So I'm going to grab the checkpoint here. Now, previously we would do a long jump over to the left of here. That would save us a few seconds on getting up here. However, because of that cutscene skip, that loading zone is still there, and doing the long jump is very risky, even in like even in a normal run or a normal record attempt. There's a lot of goats down there that explode, but there is a small patch of grass that we can use to line up the jump so that we get that grapple point and don't worry about getting hit by the goats. What's also nice is these goats can be kind of annoying. However, for some reason, if you go up next to the sprite like this, or go up next to the corruption pod like this, I like to call them grapes, then they can't actually follow you there. Now I'm going to respawn and make my way over to Dome, where the wetlands is, in the same way I did before. And if you've been paying attention, that means that we have 6 corruption grapes done, but we have yet to do any colossi. Luckily, the wetlands over here has both a corruption grape and a colossus, and we're going to be getting both one right after the other. But first we have to do this. We can long jump over here, which I messed up, but luckily I only got hit instead of getting killed, and I even got some health back from the grass. Alright, so that lineup is a bit tricky. You have to line yourself up with a small patch of dirt and then start walking towards the ledge. And once you're at the ledge, you warp. And instead of trying that again, I am just going to do a grapple storage and respawn. I don't think I got it, actually. Well, that's the backup strat, is grappling and respawning. If I don't get the warp this time, I'll do it again for real. Okay, so yeah, I didn't get it, so here's what you do. There is a fun little route you can use by grappling onto, I believe, this one, and then respawning. Right, so now I have storage. So normally, if you get the warp, you're able to kind of just walk over to where the corruption is. But we have to do some extra steps to make sure we can still get there, which first involve going here and not doing that. Let's try this again. So you go over here, you do that, cancel it there, and that lets us go to where the warp was going to take us. But that point is still stored, and we're going to use it again to enter the Colossus, actually. There's a few different ways you can get to the Colossus. The most common way is a fall damage cancel using warp, or just walking slash sometimes. But this is an even easier way that we can do because we had to get the grapple back up strat. So there's the last piece of corruption. So we can get this checkpoint really quick. Don't let the dog hit us. You can move over this way. You want to hug the left wall to make sure the grapple point stays spawned. Then when you're about at this rock, you can do that and cancel the grapple and just kind of fall right in here and grab that Colossus core. Then we can grapple all the way back to the point, and once we lose the grapple storage, we can respawn. If you try to enter a fast travel point while you have grapple storage, then the game will crash because you undraw the grapple point when you teleport away. So now we can take the fast travel to Sprite Mom and we can pay her a visit. And not only that, but from where Sprite Mom is, we have a really easy way of accessing the final Colossus that we need to get a core from. But first things first, there is something kind of funny. If you enter this cutscene too low, because of the angle Hob runs at, then you have a chance of getting soft locked because he'll just run into the wall and not into place where the cutscene wants him to be. But as long as you move through that that area, you're fine. That sort of hole in the wall there. So here's where it shows us all the different colossi, but we've kind of already seen most of them. The only one we have left is right over here, and we can do something called the forest walk-off, where you just walk off. Technically, it's a runoff, and technically I messed it up there. But by just... Okay. Oh, no. Sometimes you do... It does look like you're going to die, and it will still let you do that. But so by walking off at the edge of that platform there, we can land on top of the trees collision, which gives us an easy way to go. By jumping off of that rock, I'm able to get high enough for it to let me grapple onto that point. And with that, we have the last Colossus core. And then I can respawn. Now there's one last fall damage cancel I can do to get to here just a tiny bit quicker. And then we go back to here where that big Colossus we jumped on earlier was. And just by climbing up this leg again and meeting up with Jeeves, we can begin the final part of the game, the final ascent. For the most part, this is just powering up the Colossus. So there's not much a lot here. This would probably be where donations could be read. You're given a little bit of time to move around there, but if you try to move on top of the Colossus too early, then it will kind of glitch out and you'll just end up respawning anyways. There's not much of a point in trying to climb up before this cutscene, and even climbing up after this cutscene has a few problems. Sometimes. So here, the golem looks at Hob, looks at the floating tower, and in the Colossus's last amount of strength that we've given it, it lifts up its hand as a bridge. And we're coming up on the final ascent, which means we're going to be doing the final cutscene skip once the camera moves. Well, this is fun. There we go. It's kind of worried I would fall off the edge there. So I'll go ahead and talk about the final cutscene skip, because it's a bit complicated. First off, we're spinning these walls that have grapple points on them, and we're going to be using the very last wall to get grapple storage. Again, assuming the camera moves? This hasn't happened before. But that was a thing that it let me do? Really? Okay. I probably just have to respawn. Sometimes going to the main menu works, sometimes respawning works. I've never seen that happen before, though. Which, Hob does have a lot of that's never happened before moments. Which, if anything, is good for GDQ, right? Yeah, so second time around, luckily the grapple points we already moved are still there. We can see the actual grapple point movement. So I'm going to be getting a grapple storage on the second to last or the last grapple point, depending on how I'm able to get the grapple storage. And I'm going to use the grapple storage to grapple through the loading zone for the checkpoint, or for the cutscene at the end of the game, which starts the cutscene but kills me. And then I'm going to be something called punch manipulation. I don't really have a name for it. I don't know if Savade has a name for it. He's the one who found this. But by punching NPCs that are in cutscenes, you can speed up their current animation cycle. So we're going to be doing a few of those in order to speed up Rogue and then the Alien Queen. But the Alien Queen also, there's a certain amount of time. So there, I punch Rogue so that she starts moving first. So I need to pay close attention to the Alien's Queen's animation in order to respawn at the right time. So she looks at me, she scowls. She looks down, looks at her hand, back to me, back at her hand, now back to me. When she opens her eyes, I respawn. Because she's going to move her hand out and do that red glowy thing. That would normally hold Hob in place. And you can't move or press any buttons, including the menu button, until that's done. Until the game ends, basically. The only button you can press is the one to decide whether you fight the final boss or not. So instead, I can move around now, which means as soon as she starts her monologue, I can punch her, which puts her into that final state. And then I just hold left and press A to do the ending option where I join her. And as soon as the screen goes black, that's time. So, thank you for looking at this and taking your time for it. I'm really excited to get this in. Like I said, the run is significantly different from when it was last in GDQ. There's been huge efforts to cut down time and change a lot of stuff. There's been a lot of cool new tech found. And yeah, so that's why I'm submitting it for AGDQ 2020. Any percent no FPS abuse.